Welcome back. Today we're talking about a topic that's important to all parents. It's vaccines. So we have two experts here joining us today. Dr. Daniel Rudifer, Division Chief of Pediatric Infectious Disease at K. Hovnanian Children's Hospital, and Dr. Moses Olo Reynoso, Pediatrician at Hackensack Meridian Children's Health in Forked River. Thank you guys so much for coming today. This is such a hot topic. People are very confused, very scared. So I'm hoping that the conversation we have can help smooth things over and help some parents out there making important decisions.
Thanks for having us. Happy to be here.
Same here. I'm happy to be here. Hopefully we can say some things to help make changes.
So we have two sides of a very important coin, pediatrics and infectious disease. I think with both of your minds together, we're going to be able to tackle pretty much everything A to Z vaccines. So I think just to get started, let's talk about what vaccines are and why were they invented and why do we give them to children? Dr. Rudifer, you want to kick us off?
Happy to start. So essentially, vaccines were invented to help prevent awful infections in people. And they've sort of come out piecemeal over time as technology has advanced. But essentially, the purpose of a vaccine is to expose a person to a small and safe amount of the specific infection, bacteria or virus, with the thought that introduction to the body would sort of stimulate the immune system so that if it were to ever encounter the infection out in the wild or in the community, the body would have a very good chance to overcome it on its own. Or if it does, the vaccines are not 100% foolproof. You could still get an infection with it, but the thought is that if you're vaccinated, you would get the infection would be mitigated, or you'd have a lesser form or lesser severity of the infection.
Yeah, so it's like training your body. Basically,
Absolutely.
You're not going to go
a great way to
play baseball at the major leagues if you've never trained or played at a lower league. So a vaccine's like, hey, we're going to start you with T-ball, get your body ready, and then get you moving.
When I talk to young kids about vaccines, I often compare it to training the army of your body, your immune system. You wouldn't send an army off to war without basic training or some sort of training. Same thing with the immune system. You want to, we have the benefits of modern science and our great experience about vaccine safety and efficacy that show that this is the way to help prevent or make infections very mild.
All right, so that makes sense. We're getting it started. We're giving them to kids while they're healthy, before they've ever been exposed to an infection, exposed to a virus, so that their bodies are ready to fight.
Absolutely. That's a great way to
Sounds
think
good.
about it.
I think a lot of fear comes in when we're looking at really small babies that are just born, and people look at this list and they say, oh my gosh, there's so many that I'm going to give this tiny little baby. So talking maybe about the vaccine schedule, why was it developed the way it was? Is it safe to give all these vaccines at one time?
Yeah, so I see babies in the hospital as well, like brand new babies just born, and we start at day 0 through 18, sometimes 21. Now, I get asked that question all the time. Like, why are we giving my babies, some people call it poison. Some like, why are we injecting their little immune system with all these things? Now, the short form answer of this is their immune system is really not fully developed. This army we're talking about, the soldiers, they don't have that many of it. So if they were to get sick at that age, the likelihood of having a really severe infection or poor outcome is very high. So the thought process is, let's protect you when your immune system is still developing, so to speak. So a lot of the vaccines and the schedule is basically centered around the fact that at this age, if you're exposed to A, B, and C, you're most likely going to get very ill. Perfect example, whooping cough, the pertussis vaccine. If you were to get whooping cough, and we had 3 or 4 outbreaks, little pockets, I think, over the past year in our little community. If a kid that's 2 months old was going to get whooping cough, that kid can end up in the ICU, not breathing, on a breathing machine. They can get really, really, really sick. So the whole idea is, if we give you this vaccine at this age and you were to be exposed to it, for me, whooping cough literally is a cough. So I could come as Uncle Moses to the family and go see the new baby. Now this baby has whooping cough, ending up in the ICU. So the whole idea is let's protect this young immune systems so that if they are exposed to this infection and out in the world, their bodies will already have an army to be able to fight whatever it is, that they're exposed to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I also think you're told a lot about babies' immune systems developing at, you don't have immunity until like 6 months, right? Is that what they say? Just to keep your baby protected from all of these, unknowns of people being sick, like don't let people kiss your baby, all that kind of thing. So I think all of that is just like important to keep in mind.
It is. I mean, you have an immune system, right?
Yeah.
It's there. It's just underdeveloped. It's still developing. You have stuff from mom also, like mom's antibodies. You have some of that as well.
And mom sometimes gets vaccines while pregnant to pass on that immunity, right?
Exactly. The Tdap, again, going back to whooping cough, a lot of pregnant mothers are offered it so that the baby can get some of those antibodies, but that wanes as the baby gets older. So that's why the vaccines are introduced, so you can also start building your own army, and whenever this exposure happens, you're able to fight it, so to speak.
I'm going to ask a question now for anyone who doesn't know. What is an antibody?
An antibody is a fancy term for a protein that encapsulates a piece of the infection. So there's, let's use the coronavirus as an example because it's been sort of, the image has been impregnated in our brain. It sort of has like a crown and all these kind of sharp spikes above it. So if you think of it as like a lock and key, an antibody just sits on top of the protein, so it's a perfect match, and that stimulates our immune system to sort of go after the virus, recognize that it's not supposed to be there, alert the rest of the army, sound the alarms, and help the immune cascade to help fight off the infection. So fancy word for protein, and it's a specific protein that targets a different protein or object on the pathogen, the virus or the bacteria.
So it's kind of like a wanted poster. You put it up and everybody looks and says, don't let this guy in, right?
Yeah, and antibodies are really kind of what we're trying to make from the vaccine. That is like the end product. That is like the ultimate goal. So that when the vaccine is given, your body takes a few weeks to essentially make this appropriate antibody. But once it's made, it continues to circulate in the body for long periods of time, sometimes for life, sometimes for years, always on patrol, so to speak, so that if you were ever to encounter the infection in the community, your body would be ready.
It's so insane to me because this is like it's a whole nother universe inside our body of what's going on, of like fighting battles and looking out for things. It's absolutely insane. Dr. Moses, I'm jumping back to what you mentioned about parents, calling vaccines different things, like, why are you giving my baby poison or whatever it might be. I kind of want to talk a little bit about ingredients maybe and some of that confusion. So obviously I'm sure every vaccine is going to have a different, concoction of what is involved to get it developed. Can we talk a little bit about ingredients and like safety and testing and all of that, just to kind of assuage any fears about, what we're putting in our bodies and our babies?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it on the macro level. I'll let the science guy break it down a little bit for us, but
Try.
I'm talking to, a mom or a dad just sitting there talking to the parents, and those questions come up. So I explained to them essentially that just going back to the whole what a vaccine is and things like that. I'm like, look, if you are out and you are exposed to, let's pick measles, right? You're exposed to measles, your body is going to make fighters. They're going to make these antibodies, but your body wasn't ready for measles. So you get sick while trying to make these fighters. You get the fever, the rash, the body aches, inflammation in your brain. So you can get really sick when you're attacked by measles. At the end of it, if you do well, your body will make fighters. You'll have antibodies. But to make those fighters, you had to suffer through hospital admission, IV, medicine, whatever the case may be. If you were to encounter measles again in the future, you'll be fine because you have these fighters. But we don't want you to suffer to make fighters. That's what the vaccines are. So we'll give you pieces of this virus or bacteria. So your body looks at it and says, oh, there's a bad guy here. Let's make an army. And they make all this army and they're like, how come this bad guy is not fighting? Right? Because the vaccine is really parts of the virus. It's not like a whole army of viruses like you would get from the real thing. So we're essentially making your body react to something that's really not a big deal, so to speak. Now, take aluminum, for example. It's one of the big things. Aluminum is in vaccines. I don't want my baby to get aluminum. There's aluminum in formula. There's aluminum in the deodorant you're using. There's aluminum in vegetables, in the soil. It's one of the most common compounds, for lack of a better term, that's out there. Now, the amount of aluminum in a vaccine is very, very, very small. It's not even in all vaccines. That being said, what's the purpose of the aluminum, right? It's an adjuvant. What an adjuvant is, it's almost like it makes the body react bigger, so to speak. It makes you think that the vaccine is like, oh my God, it's the real thing. So it's like, it gives you the impression like you have a lot of these viruses. So your body makes a robust immune response without giving you a whole lot of disease, so to speak. Yeah. So the aluminum is important, but it's not so overwhelming as a bad ingredient that's going to cause harm to your child, so to speak.
Spot on. Well said. And just like numbers, in terms of like the aluminum concept, that the level of aluminum in a vaccine is usually like a millionth of a fraction of what you would see sort of out in nature, like in a can of tuna, for example. So yes, it exists. There's no need to sort of deny that, but it's there for a reason, and it's because, like you said, it essentially amplifies the immune system. It makes it from a good vaccine to an excellent vaccine, So I totally concur with that. And then just without going into all the ingredients, I would say every ingredient serves its purpose. There's no fluff. There's nothing put in there just sort of for giggles. Different components, for example, like thimerosal or neomycin. These are either stabilizers that keeps the vaccine sort of safe for storage, so we don't have to keep producing it every day, and also ingredients that help prevent the vaccine formula from being contaminated by other pathogens. Like you could have sometimes every few years you hear about like formula being contaminated with this bacteria. Because it's liquid sitting out sort of in the open or in a refrigerator, really, you need to make sure that the vaccine stays pure. So the ingredients serve its purpose like that. But again, it's at such a low level that there should be no obvious side effects from it, that your body can tolerate it at that sort of minuscule level.
This was awesome. That was super helpful because I think parents, we're trying to be informed, and you're looking at ingredients and you're starting to question things because you're saying, is this safe? What should I do? And a lot of us are then getting information from sources that maybe aren't so credible, like people on TikTok talking about, oh, you should never do this or you should never do that. So I think
it's not coming from his TikTok.
No, definitely not Dr. Moses. He's got the best TikTok. But I think it's explaining why those components are there and that they're there intentionally. Like you just said, it's not like we're just putting this in there because we're trying to, fill your baby with something. It's like, no, this was there for a reason because it's part of this puzzle that fits it together so that it can work.
I think a big thing that a lot of people, I think mercury is another one that you hear. Yes, you hear mercury. Oh my God, I don't want that. But when you look at the molecular nature of it, the type of mercury that's in vaccines is the one that your body breaks down and excretes. But the mercury that you think of is the bad one that can maybe stain your body and cause issues, but that's not what you're getting. So when you hear the misinformation, oh, it's got mercury in it. Yes, but let's talk about the type of mercury that's in there and what the purpose is. So it's there for a purpose, for the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, but at the same time, it's not sitting in your body and going to cause cancer 10 years from now, right? Your body breaks it down and excretes it. So I think having that conversation with families and helping them understand that, yes, what you may have heard or read is true to an extent, but let me explain to you further. I think as long as families are willing to engage in conversations, then we can open up their eyes and minds to understand that these things are actually a lot safer than, they may perceive.
I think that's the root of a lot of misinformation, is it's coming from some piece of truth. Like you said with the mercury, sure, maybe a certain kind of mercury can be harmful, but these like little plants of misinformation are people plucking something from maybe another study that was maybe disproved, or plucking something from something completely irrelevant, but there's a parallel that you could try to make. What is the process of, and I guess maybe we can even use COVID as an example, since that was the most recent, vaccine creation, kind of getting through to saying this is safe and we can give this. What kind of process does this go through? Any vaccine.
There's a standardized process led by the FDA that goes essentially in order of clinical trials, where essentially a product is tested first in animals and then in humans in a very small scale, mainly for safety data, and then ultimately in a large scale to look for efficacy data. But there's essentially a process to it.
I just want an answer that will help parents understand that this is not something that was just, like you were saying, just cooked up and we're just giving. This has been proven to be safe, and there has been testing to prove that it works, and the risk of a reaction from vaccine is, not as great as the issue would be if you got sick from a disease.
Absolutely. The risk for side effects, I'll just comment on that. The risk of side effects from vaccines is quite frankly minimal. I've personally never seen any of the severe reactions, not that they can't exist. Again, we're talking about, reactions that are so rare that, you're more likely to hit the lottery twice, but we commonly see, and this is counseling that I give for people who get vaccines, are some localized, pain at the site of the injection, fevers. And I tell parents that I like hearing that, because it tells me that the immune system is responding. It's recognizing that something shouldn't be there, again, at a low sort of benign level, and it's starting the training of the army. So some side effects are actually expected. It's almost strange not to have any side effects. So, but they're usually quite mild, and they're usually very temporary. Usually a day or two. Yeah. I'm not sure yourself, but if you ever had the flu vaccine, your arm hurts for a day or two. But again, that sort of risk is a drop in the bucket. We've had the highest pediatric death rate in over 15 years. We had 226 children die of the flu. Most were unvaccinated. Again,
that's awful.
The kids that I see in the hospital who are, intubated, requiring respiratory support, they're almost never vaccinated, unfortunately. And yes, you could still get the flu or any infection if you're vaccinated, but usually they're taking care of that at home, with a couple days rest.
Yeah, and I think you made a valid point comparing, because I get that a lot also. When I was growing up, we used to go to chickenpox parties. If one kid had it, everyone would send their kids there so you can get the disease naturally, and your fighters could also be created naturally without you getting this vaccine, so to speak. And yes, you can look at it from that standpoint, but when you look at the numbers, right, if you were to look at measles, if you know that 1 out of X number of cases can lead to you being in the ICU on respiratory support, and 1 out of this number of cases can lead to a child dying. I think we have a little over 1,000 cases in America now.
1,001 cases.
3 deaths?
Three pediatric deaths.
Right?
Horrible.
3 deaths out of over 1,000. That's 1 in 333, so to speak, or thereabouts. That's a big number. Mm-hmm. Now, if we look at giving you the MMR vaccine, how many kids have died from the actual vaccine itself?
Zero.
To my knowledge, zero. Mm-hmm. Where I gave you the vaccine and bloop, you fell down and died, an hour later. So the whole idea is we don't want to take that risk, and one thing I show my patients or the parents, I have kids, right? I'm not going to do something to your child or offer to do something to your child that I don't believe in. I think my background, I was, born in a country where maybe vaccines weren't so readily available, so a lot of these diseases I've seen most people in this country have never seen polio. I mean, most younger kids, right? You may talk to grandpa and he remembers polio, but I've seen people with polio. I know I have, a family member that has polio, and it's permanent paralysis in a lot of cases, even death in a lot of cases. But I hear parents, oh, I've never seen polio. Why do we have a vaccine for it? That's why you've never seen polio. It's because of the vaccine, right? And if we start rejecting these vaccines, then it's one of those things that can bring some of these diseases back. So testing has happened in smaller scales, larger scales. It has to happen, right? That's why we have an FDA to say, all right, does this thing meet safety criteria? Like, show me the numbers. How many people have gotten sick? What was the level of sickness? And throughout all the testing, that's why we can come out and boldly say, you may get a fever, you may get a local reaction, because that was what was seen during the testing. If something was tried and the first 3 people that got it had seizures, it's not going to make the light of day. The FDA is not going to approve it.
And I'll just say that because we have in place a vaccine adverse effect reporting system. So, even after the product or the vaccine is distributed, like if there's aftermarket complications, the CDC learns in real time, and they always have the ability to retract anything that's concerning. So, we have systems in place to look for these kind of concerning side effects.
Yeah. I always tell people about the polio vaccine. When it first came out, it was oral polio vaccine, and I think it was a live vaccine, and
it was.
Unfortunately they did studies and the vaccine came out, and some people actually got some side effects of polio, had reactions where it's like, oh my god, it looks like this happened or that happened. Again, kind of went back to the lab and said, all right, this thing maybe wasn't ready for game time yet, and it was changed to what we use now, the inactivated polio vaccine, which doesn't have the side effects of the original one, but there's still countries that actually give the oral one because it was safe to an extent, but didn't meet our standards here. So that's why it went back to the lab, so to speak, and now we administer the one that we do, the inactivated one, which is a lot safer. So it never ends, the safety of all of these things. So it goes through a rigorous process before coming out live. And even while it's going every year, because of this system, what new side effects have happened, if any. And for all these years, it's kind of been the same. That's why a lot of us can come out boldly and say, yes, it is safe. Yes, it doesn't cause any of these diseases that you think it may cause, because it has been studied for years and years and years.
Yeah, and sometimes the side effects are not obvious when you're dealing with sort of small sample sizes, early clinical trials, which is why you have this system in place to look at the bigger picture, once millions of doses have been distributed. And don't quote me, but I believe the inactivated polio vaccine had over 2 million children looked at before they got their ultimate efficacy data. So I just wanted to piggyback on some anecdotal stories because I think they're fun. My own pediatrician, I think we're like the last generation where we knew adults that had polio.
Yeah.
I was terrified. I don't know how you felt when you saw your uncle.
Scary.
My pediatrician was to walk around with like a very heavy limp and like sort of a bionic leg. And I told my mom, please, I don't want to get that. And she's like, well, there's a way to prevent it. I was excited. Like I was not, scared. And then my dad, he was born in the 40s. He used to tell me like when I was young and sort of told him like, when I was old enough to essentially say like, I'm nervous about getting vaccines. They're going to hurt, He's like, if you saw what I saw, you'd be begging for some of these vaccines. And there's actually photos. You could Google this thing where people are lined around the block when the polio vaccine came out, just waiting all day just for the privilege of getting the vaccine because they didn't want to end up like their family, their friends. They saw the devastation. They didn't need social media to know that it was scary. They knew firsthand. That's sort of like the ultimate sort of fear. Whether that's the reason to get a vaccine is, sort of debatable. But I think there's so much hesitancy because we're just not seeing so much because of, like you said, a testament to how effective vaccines are. I shared with you in an email sort of a graphic from the CDC that shows cases of measles that were almost north of 500,000 cases a year in the 60s go down to nearly undetectable levels after the vaccine. It's just, the proof is in the pudding. You don't need to see any other paper except to see how many cases are year after year once the vaccine's introduced. It's a clear downgrade.
Tried and true. I love it. I'm going to jump into another myth since we're talking about side effects. Autism. that's been on the table and brought up a lot. Does anybody want to talk about one, maybe where this originated, why that is even talked about?
I could start.
Yeah.
So there is this infamous physician. His medical license has since been redacted. Dr. Andrew Wakefield. In 1998, he produced a paper in a fairly prestigious paper called The Lancet, which falsely claimed a correlation between vaccines and autism.
And was he making this a blanket statement, like every vaccine?
It was specifically the MMR.
It was
Okay.
specifically the live attenuated vaccines, the MMR, yes. And essentially, the article was fully retracted by The Lancet. It took quite some time. It only got officially retracted in 2010, although in the years before that they were talking about it. But because it was full of misinformation, he manipulated the data. He didn't comment about financial incentives he received from lawyers who were litigating against the vaccine companies. And there were lots of ethical misconduct that he did. He performed procedures on children without informed consent. So it was sort of like a threefold kind of no-no from the peer review process perspective. Like any one of those is like a cardinal sin in our world. And that's the main reason why. So they saw this kind of falsely created study. But most importantly, people have tried their very hardest to try to replicate what he found, and it has not been replicable. And there's no objective connection right now between autism and vaccines. That's a myth.
Yeah. And one thing I always tell parents is, let's even take America out of it. There's been countless number of studies that have been done to link MMR and autism. You're talking in different continents, different countries. They've done their own studies. And without a shadow of a doubt, not one of those studies was able to say maybe there was even a casual connection between a vaccine and autism. The reason why this even has legs and continues to have legs is based on the schedule, right? We give the MMR vaccine around the time the kid is 12 months old, right? That's when most kids start maybe learning how to walk, the mamas and the dadas and all of those things. And that's also around the time where you start maybe seeing some regression of skills, some, oh, how come my kid is not doing this? Why are they flapping? Why are they stimming? Why are they doing some of these things? The earliest I can even say I can, look at things and diagnose autism is around 18 months, right? There are situations where you may get the vaccine at 12 months. There's some, pediatricians that may offer it at 15 months. So you get that vaccine, and within 3 months, you start showing signs of what we're like, oh my God, my child has autism. So
it's just about the development.
It's more or less a timing thing. This is the age we give you the vaccine, and this is around the time we start. You're not going to see a child with autism at 6 months, even though they may have it. And the other thing is, if you look at all the twin studies that have been done, identical twins, right? One has autism. Almost, I think, close to a 90% chance that the twin may have it. So there's a stronger genetic component to it. I tell my parents and patients all the time is I have a pretty decent percentage of patients that have never gotten the MMR vaccine or haven't gotten any vaccines. But yet I still see a similar percentage of kids with autism in that group. So and that's what this Wakefield study didn't do. You need to compare people that, have autism and got the vaccine and people that didn't get the vaccine and also have autism, just to kind of see if there's a cause and effect. So there always has to be a control group and a group that, got whatever the vaccine is. And it has to be a blinded study. There's a way to do studies. And this Wakefield study, where everything came from, did not do any of that. That's why you really couldn't accept it. So I think at the end of the day, all of these things continue to perpetuate because obviously it started from the study. But when I tell you that so many people in different countries have done different studies in different ways and things like that, I think there was one where they showed a video to, I think maybe like 20 pediatricians of 10 kids that had autism, that were later diagnosed with autism. And they watched their birthday videos at 12 months before they got the MMR vaccine. And just to see if they saw any signs of autism. And in one video, they're like, yes, this kid is doing this and this. They're not really making eye contact. This one had autism, this one. And all of these doctors were able to guess the right kids that had autism before any of them had gotten the vaccine.
That's so interesting. You answered my question. I was going to say, why did this have so much power? And it's honestly just, like you said, because of timing. The timing had lined up that people were saying, well, it must have been because of that. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think also the X factor was that the Lancet was it's still a very prestigious journal. So that kind of helped
How did he get this through?
Manipulation of data.
Okay.
I think perhaps their peer review process wasn't as fine-tuned as it is now, but I can't speak for the paper itself, but it's a big shame on that paper. It's kind of like
because do you know what year that was published? And
98.
We're still talking about it.
Yeah, it still has legs. And then the other thing, I just wanted to piggyback. I totally agree that most children with autism actually have very might not be obvious signs, but some subtle signs prior to the 1 year of age. There's a strong genetic predisposition, like you said, but also I think just the political nature that autism diagnoses are increasing is true to an extent, but that's because we are so we're becoming so advanced from in developmental and behavioral pediatrics that we are just recognizing some of the minor cases. Perhaps we only picked up in the more extreme cases or the obvious cases, but autism is a spectrum. It's a rainbow. It's not just yes or no. And I think some of the uptick in the numbers we're seeing are basically we're catching some more mild cases than perhaps we pediatricians weren't before, just because we're sort of like hyper aware of it now, which is important because the only treatment for autism is sort of early intervention. So catching it early, we're sort of screening for it earlier. So there's so many variables that are leading to the numbers. But to my understanding, the rates of autism have been sort of stable for decades now. We're just becoming more aware of it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about timing again, because we mentioned, just timing of these vaccines and then kind of like, not direct causation, but timing in general. If parents are coming, and Dr. Moses, I don't know if they come to you and say, I don't want to do all these at once. I don't want to give my baby 5 vaccines today, whether it's because they don't want their baby to be crying or maybe they're just, hesitant about doing them all at once. What do you say to parents who are looking to stretch that timeline out? Is that something that you recommend, you don't? And maybe why do we have this timeline in general?
Yeah. So again, there is a schedule that's released by the CDC. It's been the same schedule for a while. And that's been studied over the years that doing it this way offers you the maximum protection from the various diseases. It's been studied, replicated, this way works. Now, I think when I was training, I remember kids coming in and getting 1 shot and 1 shot and 1 shot and 1 shot, 4 shots at a visit, And back in the day, right, you just go, you get your shots and you go home. And the kids have done fine. I'm sure I was one of those kids that got multiple shots. But thankfully, we're fast forward now to a time where some of those shots and some of those vaccines have been able to be combined, where it's not 4 needles, maybe 2 needles, and you're still getting the same protection. You're still getting the same robust response from your immune system. So now a parent comes in and says, well, I really don't want this, or I don't want that. Can I get just one? And I'll come back in 2 weeks and get another one. And my advice to them is always the same. This way has been studied. This is the way that works. I don't know how well protected your child will be if we do it this way. However, I feel like, especially at a time like this, being parents is you look at your child and you're scared. So the last thing I want to do is say, nope, you have to do it this way or else no. So I provide you with information that, look, this is the way I know it works. But if this is a way you feel comfortable, I try not to deviate too much from it. So if you were to get one vaccine today, I'm like, why don't you come back a week from now to get the second one? So at least we're still in some sort of safety window, so to speak. But then I tell them, look, if you want to super spread it out, now you're coming in this week for a shot, and this week for a shot, and this week for a shot.
Prolonging it and just putting the kid through more shots than they need.
They did a small study that compared kids that got it per the schedule and kids that had it spaced out. And I would say from a stress standpoint, I don't want to be going to the doctor's office if every single time I go, I'm getting a shot. And sometimes I just go in and get a shot and I leave. So that can actually cause more stress on that child than if you were to get it all at once. But the understanding for me, I understand that parents are scared, but I just try to reassure them that, look, your body's response to all of these different vaccines, your body is such an awesome creation, so to speak, that it's able to respond to each disease separately. And yes, you got 4 different vaccines. There is an army being made for each one all at the same time. And it works. It's been done like that for years, but yes, the alternate schedule, there's not much study because everyone wants something different. So I just advise them that, look, I can't really speak to how well your child is going to be protected against it. This one has been studied, but if you want to deviate, please let's at least stay within a, comfortable window as opposed to getting one now and you coming back in 4 months to get another one.
Talking again about fears and how you're addressing it with patients and parents who are hesitant or maybe have come into the office and been like, you know what, I'm not going to do this. Mm-hmm. What's your approach? How do you educate and not, scare people into saying, well, if you don't do this, this is going to happen? Like, how do you delicately walk that line?
So it's important to find out what your fear is, right? What are you afraid of? Like, what information do you have in your hands that has made you afraid? Because everyone's reason is different. If your fear is you have an uncle who had a child that got a shot and the kid got a 104 fever the next day, if that's the reason, then I can talk to you and say, look, just like you said before, when you get a vaccine, your body will respond in some way, shape, or form. You may get a fever. You may, have pain at the site, but that shows that your immune system is actually responding nicely to the vaccine. And a lot of these side effects, so to speak, are very temporary. They're short-lived. So I'm able to address that specific concern based on the information you gave me. If your fear is a video that you watched about the vaccine causing autism, I'll go again into this discussion we just had and say, hey, this thing has been disproven. So it's important to find out why that fear is there, and then I address it that way. So and people have different reasons, and because you watched or read somewhere, I'm like, listen, you can't just read or watch the bad. You have to also, here are studies that have been done. Here's information. I try to direct them to specific websites or specific groups that have well-researched information. Go and read it and then call me back and ask me questions,
What are some good resources for parents?
The CDC has numerous resources, essentially well-published, peer-reviewed articles that comment about, I guess it depends on what you're looking for, but, there's articles specifically on safety. There's articles specifically on efficacy, retrospective reviews, you name it. We could find a paper that sort of supports it. So I think a lot of it depends on what you're looking for, which vaccine you're looking for. It's not just like all vaccines in general, but we're happy to supply some of those references to your audience.
I'm going to go back to a little bit on misinformation. I think there was another one that's kind of like a heavy hitter of what people talk about with vaccines, infertility. Can we talk about maybe why that, again, has emerged? Is there any evidence? Like, what's the deal?
I would say, without even breaking anything down, if you look at the numbers of people that have been vaccinated and the numbers of babies that have happened, it's even hard for me to draw where the link is, right? Like, if vaccines led to infertility, I think we wouldn't see as much of baby booms that we've seen years and years after years. I frankly don't know where that originated from. I think it was probably during the COVID years. I think there were some links between After some people got the COVID vaccine, maybe their menstrual cycle was a little off. And if
yeah, I
that's
remember that.
off, it may affect your ability to have a child based on different things. Obviously, having irregular cycles can lead to you having issues having a baby. So that's probably where that stemmed from. But just overall, talking about, all the vaccines that are on the schedule that we've been administering for years and years and years, there's never really been any link between people receiving the vaccines. And now we're talking about adults, because I deal with kids, right? Pediatrician, right?
But it could be a fear for a parent about their child. Like, if I'm going to do this, is this going to affect them down the road?
And I just tell the parent, did you get vaccines? Yes, I did. You have babies. You know what I mean? So it's I try to make it as simple, as straightforward as possible, because we tend to overthink things. But I'm like, vaccines, there are more people that have been vaccinated than unvaccinated. If we were to just look at this country, for example, and yet we're continuing to have kids, or nurseries are still filled with babies.
I think a lot of this misinformation came from the HPV vaccine, just because the human papillomavirus vaccine, because there's some sexual connotation, because it can prevent both genital warts, but also cervical cancer. So I think people sort of try to extrapolate from it. But what people did, or the anti-vaxxers did during COVID, is they basically did a copy-paste and took basically the same thoughts and just said, oh, it's the same is true for COVID. And they were making claims, people were making false claims about infertility 1 month after the vaccine came out, which... I'm not, the audience doesn't need to be reminded. It takes, 9 months to make a baby. So, just to show you that there's really, the summary is there's no teeth to it. There's no evidence-based medicine that supports it, or even has like a little bit of association. It's just, it's not there.
I think another piece of the puzzle people kind of are confused about is herd immunity. And I think this happened a lot when it came to COVID, people thinking, well, it's better if we have had it naturally and then that's our immunity. Can someone explain, one, what herd immunity is, and I guess how it's achieved?
So herd immunity essentially represents that, I think the right way to explain it, that people are protected because there is so much immunity towards the pathogen in the population that the pathogen is unlikely to be present in such high levels, because most people are fighting it off. I think that's kind of like a soft way to explain it.
Yeah, I think you look at it from the standpoint of, if a disease were to come into a population, and it's a population that's not been vaccinated at all, and it's a population that hasn't had the disease at all. Let's talk about measles. If measles goes into a community where no one has the measles vaccine and no one has ever had measles, it's going to have a field day. It's just going to jump from one person to another. At the end of this, infection, so to speak, everyone will have had measles, and everyone will eventually develop antibodies to it. But out of that population, a lot of people will probably get sick. Some may even die. Now, with herd immunity, you can achieve herd immunity also through vaccinations. So if you have a population, let's take 100 people, for example, and 98 of them are vaccinated from the measles virus. Now, all of these 98 people have an army ready to fight if measles were to come in. Measles comes in, there are 2 people that haven't been vaccinated. If the first person that measles virus attacks has, the army already, I'll beat it down, and that's the end of it. That's it.
It's less likely to
It's less likely to propagate because everyone has a army. But the less herd, the higher the chance of this thing spreading. So there's a percentage. I think it's 95%.
I think that's like the sticking point, is that people say, oh yeah, if we all get it, we do well. But it takes a lot. You need very, very high levels, which is why I worry, about our population with declining rates of vaccine usage in incoming kindergartners. We're actually not meeting the threshold, which is 92%. So once you hit below that threshold, the infection is more likely to propagate in the community. So yes, herd immunity is a thing. It's hard to achieve naturally. It's much easier and much more efficient to achieve it through vaccination, and And it really expedites the process, vaccination. There's much less, morbidity, real-time risk to the disease.
I think that the really, really important thing about herd immunity is for those people that can't get the vaccine.
That's what I was just thinking about.
Based on age, right? A 2-month-old kid can't get the measles vaccine, right? There's an appropriate age where we deliver it. So you want to protect the most delicate population by getting the vaccine. That's why some parents will say, hey, I want to make sure grandpa and grandma also have the Tdap vaccine. They're up to date because they're going to be watching my baby that is not yet protected from the whooping cough. So as long as everyone around is protected, I can increase the chances or the likelihood that my baby is also going to be protected until they're ready, to get their own vaccine. There are also people that maybe someone has cancer and they're undergoing chemotherapy. Their immune system has been wiped out from being treated. That's someone that cannot get measles, that cannot get any of these viruses. It may be mild for you, but if that person were to get it, they can die from it.
Right.
So the whole idea of herd immunity is not just for yourself, but also for our most vulnerable population. So I think it's very important that, and like you said, we're achieving that quickly and efficiently with vaccinations. I don't think I want to be a part of a group that's like, all right, let's all get polio so we can have herd immunity. No, I'll rather get the vaccine than get the real disease.
And I think graphics sometimes really help when it comes to things like this, like herd immunity. I've seen some graphics of people who have the vaccine are in green, people who did not have a vaccine are in red. But if you have enough green around you, you can protect those people who couldn't get it.
We have real-time knowledge of how this works. All the outbreaks are in unvaccinated communities. There's no herd immunity, so the infection's running rampant in the community. Whereas where you're seeing just like 1 or 2 cases here and there, those communities are definitely more vaccinated. It's just not spreading as much.
Yeah. I'm going to go back now to talking about prepping your child or prepping yourself mentally to bring your child for vaccines, because some parents might be scared or, sad to see their baby upset. Do you ever tell parents, should they give Tylenol before they go to, ease pain? Is that something that you do, you don't do?
That's something that I don't know where it came from, but it's around, but again, there was studies that have been done that showed that people that pre-treated their children, with Tylenol, Motrin, don't ever give to a child under 6 months, 6 months and older, but given fever reducers prior to getting the vaccine has actually lowered the immune response.
Oh,
right. So basically when the fever coming and all of those things happening after the vaccine is part of building a bigger and stronger army. Not saying that if your child doesn't have a fever after a vaccine doesn't mean they're not protected. Sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you don't. But when you give medicine beforehand, sometimes it can actually lower your levels of protection, lower the amount of immunity, so to speak, that your body builds up. Now, if you don't give it, and your child, I tell them, look, your child's getting an injection. They're going to cry. There's going to be some soreness at the site, little ice pack if they'll tolerate it. But all of these things are short-lived. They may develop a low-grade fever. If they develop a fever and they're comfortable, just put a cool compress, let the fever ride, as long as the kid's fine. Now, if the kid is screaming and miserable and uncomfortable, you can give them some medicine to help alleviate and make them a little bit more comfortable. But you want to take each situation individually, but I always advise against pre-medicating prior to the vaccine, because that's the whole purpose of the vaccines. I want your immune system to give the best possible response, and pre-medicating can sometimes reduce that.
I'm so glad I asked, because I feel like some people would just not even know that, to think, oh, well, if I give them Tylenol, maybe it'll make them a little less, irritable, might help if the pain on the injection site, but if it's actually going to weaken the response your body has, what's the point? Don't do that. So that's huge. Is there anything else that parents do that we shouldn't do?
I would say that's probably the biggest thing is with medications. And I think telling them things that could happen is also helpful, because if I give you a vaccine on Friday and maybe I'm not open on Saturday and all of a sudden you wake up and there's a big red spot in your kid's arm, you may go rush into the emergency room. But if I tell you that, hey, look, these things may happen, your kid may develop soreness at the site. There may be a local reaction where there's some redness, may even get hard sometimes. That's fine. Just little ice on it, if they'll tolerate it. Sometimes they say even maybe doing heat packs, they'll help tolerate it. But the whole idea that some sort of crazy infection is happening that's not true. So kind of warning them about some of these things, I think, eases their mind. So if they do see it, they're like, oh, this is what he had spoken about, and they're not as concerned.
Yeah. Counseling and expectations go a long way, pretty much for all the fields. But yes, just planting the seed that, these things can happen, would happen. Like I tell people, I expect like a low grade fever. I set the bar, and I think that's really helpful. But at the same time, you tell them, what to be really cautious of. Really high grade fevers, seizures, God forbid. All these things, the things we tell them to warn about, they're actually provided with the vaccine information statement. So every patient that leaves a clinic who gets a vaccine gets a copy of a handout from the CDC that essentially discusses the vaccine, any potential side effects, and its purpose.
I think that's so important, the information factor, because I think a lot of parents just don't have it. So that leaves questions, and then where do you go to get your answers? You're looking online, and sometimes you're not getting it from a great source. So I think having all of that readily available and like doctors explaining it before and after is so important. So I'm really grateful for what you both do and that you're both so open to talking about it, because I think sometimes people are scared to talk about it, doctors and patients, because it's kind of a touchy subject. So
I tell people it creates a lot of emotions.
Yeah, it does. And I think at the end of the day, as the doctor, as the parent, we all want the same thing. We all want our kids to be healthy. We all want them to be protected and to be well. And I think as long as we're all on the same page about that, we'll move forward.
There's no one size fits all approach. Definitely the first thing you need to do is get an intake and sort of gauge where their concerns or fears are. But after that's done, if I still kind of feel hesitancy, I sort of go into my own story. I tell them that I have two young boys. And then I go on to say that my son is actually the first child at Methodist Hospital, which is in Houston, Texas, to get the COVID vaccine as part of the pediatric trial. So I practice what I preach. My kids are vaccinated. They get their vaccines on time because of the critical nature of the timing schedule. And I say I wouldn't do it if I didn't believe in the product, And the last thing I want to say, and this is sort of less well known, is that children who are vaccinated, there's a lot of research in the last few years, immunology research, that actually show that those children's immune responses are in general so much more robust than the unvaccinated or the partially vaccinated, because they've had exceptional training. They get vaccines at this routine interval. They are getting it at sort of a dosage that allows them to optimize their immune system. And I see it. The kids who are fully vaccinated are never the ones I see, super sick in the hospital. Yes, there are exceptions, but, for the most part, the kids that I see who are, in the ICU, they're often either under-vaccinated or have immune problems that don't enable them to create a normal immune response.
A lot of us have seen what measles have done to children, what polio has done to children, what a lot of these diseases have done. I've seen it. I worked in the ER for many years as well. I've seen what a lot of this vaccine preventable diseases has done to kids. And the last thing I want to see is another one of my patients. I feel like my patients become a part of my family. I look at them as my kids, so the last thing I want is to see you sick or, God forbid, even die from a disease that could have been prevented. A lot of these vaccine schedules and the things we do are not just an American thing. Vaccines are administered in countries all over the world, and that's something that has to be done. Because we travel from different places. So if you have a country where no one's vaccinating and they're coming in here, it's just going to spread. So it's not just one country that's doing it. Canada is doing it. UK is doing it. France and countries in Asia, we're all promoting vaccines at different levels and different stages, because if the world is protected, that's how we got polio to where we did. It's not just because we vaccinated in America, it's because the whole world bought into it. And that's why it was driven down so much. And now if that begins to change, if the narrative changes, if the, anti-vaccine campaign grows beyond this country into other countries, we're going to go back to the prehistoric ages, and I don't want us to start vaccinating our kids because of polio coming back. I want us to just keep doing it because we've been protected for this long.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I really appreciate you both sharing so personally that both being dads, this is both, again, practicing what you preach, because, again, coming from people who are super educated about how vaccines work, why they're safe, why they're important, I think that carries so much weight for people to hear about it and say, okay, they get it and they're doing it. So I really appreciate that.
If our public service announcement is, if you love your kids and you want to do what is long-term best for them, you would vaccinate them.
Yeah.
And that would give you the peace of mind saying, you've at least done everything in your possibility to at least prevent. Like, people should be able to go to sleep well saying, I'm not a prophet, I can't control the future, but I know that I've at least given my child a chance to overcome an infection if they encounter it. So that's all you could really ask for at the end of the day.
And I would just, I guess, remind, anybody listening, if you have questions, talk to your doctors. Like, ask all the questions you want. Like, you guys have been amazing. I've talked your ear off for an hour, but you've answered all my questions. And I think for parents to just have somebody who's going to be open and talk to them and explain things, I think that can go such a long way. Well, thank you both so much for coming. I think this was super informative. I hope that it helps people and we can make some good change.
Thanks for having us. Hopefully we can make some good change. Definitely.
Yes, thank you.